Welcome to Sunday service.
What I would like to do to talk back is, and maybe I should say this, so have it start normally and see if there are any questions or comments. But before we close it out, I would like just 2 or 3 minutes given mention some things about Clarence Jordan.
I tend to do that anyway. I always have the speaker. Yeah.
Okay.
It's officially pumpkin season. Sweet little pumpkin.
Fascinating. And how did you learn about him? How did you learn about him?
I knew about him forever. I can't even tell
Just right now. Yes. Good morning.
It may have been because
Hey, you guys, that wasn't very nice of you not to send me the red jacket. I'm sorry. The red jacket memo, I mean, how hard would it be? Yeah, I mean, it wasn't very nice of you guys not sing along with wonderful. He would come down. Sing today with our master. So I actually warmed up. Yes. Yeah. Hey, none of this churchy stuff, all that.
I just wanted to say good morning to both of you. How are you?
Yes, with joy.
Good. I'm just double checking so we're singing for doxology. Okay. All right. Well, I will do what I do, and if you're joining us, and then during the announcements, our announcement selections, they printed stuff before. Usually, I can send it in on a Thursday. It seemed like this week she did it earlier. She had stuff done by Wednesday. So anyway.
I love it when you explain.
Well, and I'll just give a little bit because they're all from the Southern Harmony tradition, folk tunes. And I just thought, given, I did a little reading about Clarence Jordan.
Oh, yeah.
So I just felt this might be kind of a neat for music from his tradition. So.
I always love that.
Okay.
Good. Thank you, Beth.
What was this? It's a sailboat coming in?
We sailed it down on Friday.
Right.
They will pull it next week, and then we have another day where we go do the antifreeze. Well, we're on the third floor. Yeah. Actually, we didn't get to sail the first floor on Friday. After all of the nights, we had 2 Friday, still no. But it's cool.
So we'll start in about 3 minutes. I thank you for joining us today. Beautiful October morning. I love October. We're lucky to have Octobers and all the other months. It's nice to be in the moment. Thank you again for joining us.
Still producing it, so I keep watering them.
Sure, yeah.
That's what they are, it's water.
Yeah, no, that's right.
So
That's right.
it's dry. Drive.
No, we flew. Yeah, we flew to Toronto. And our friends that met us in the airport, and they drove us to their home about 2 hours north. And we did 5 hours.
Thank you. I had so much trouble with it. I didn't have a drive. So I can get
No,
Sally did it. Sally did applications. She's here. But has been down in Illinois. He's in hospital 4 days and then her daughter getting her daughter running to Illinois for a few days. He's back in the street.
Yeah, we got.
Sorry, he didn't know. I don't either. Yeah. Bruce checked it. They don't think so. She's happy.
Thank you, Beth. Good morning, UUFDC. I'm Cindy Nelson and will be your service leader today. To start us out, let me read a welcoming poem that I discovered. It was written by Barbara Hamilton Holloway, and well, when I skimmed through it, I thought, it just fits us. So, we gather here as individual people, young and old, male and female, temporarily able and disabled, gay, lesbian, bisexual, and straight people, all the colors of the human race, atheist, theist, agnostic, Christian, Buddhist, feminist, humanist. We gather here as a community of people who are more than categories. We gather here, each ministering to the other, meeting one another's strength, encouraging wholeness. We give thanks for this extraordinary blessing, the gathering together of separate, unique individuals as one whole, one body, one fellowship. Here may our minds stretch, our hearts open, our spirits deepen. Here may we acknowledge our brokenness and be ever stirred by love's infinite possibilities. So, welcome to UUFDC. Whether you are physically here or tuned in online, we are so pleased you are with us. It's been our practice to invite visitors to stand and introduce yourselves. Do we have visitors today? It's all familiar faces. No, there.
Visitor, Mark Nelson.
Good morning, Mark. Welcome. You have a great last name. Somewhere, right? A few minor housekeeping details. Please raise your hand if at any time you are having difficulty hearing either me or Dick, and Marilyn will help us out. Please turn off any cell phones or other things that make noise. And thank you very much for wearing your masks as we strive to continue to stay healthy in our fellowship. At this time, if you have any announcements for the good of the fellowship, Terry has the mic and he will bring it around. Please remember that this is a live broadcast, so state your name before your announcement.
There's still apples. So I have more in my car and little bags to put them in.
I guess I'll follow that one. There are still tomatoes. I also have eggplant and some basil if you're interested in that in my car.
It's our own farmer's market.
Zucchini?
And there's still more music. I missed the deadline this week for having pieces published. So I did want to give a little context because when I looked at what Dick was talking about this morning, and he was talking about Clarence Jordan, and I did a little research on that, who was from the South. So everything this morning is coming from a collection I have of folk hymns for the piano. And the first piece was called Promised Land, which is an American folk tune. And all of these arrangements are by John Carter. For the offertory, it will be a piece called I Will Arise and Go to Jesus, which is from Walker's Southern Harmony, that collection. And again, John Carter's arrangement. And then the postlude will be Come Thou Fount of Every Blessing, again, from the Repository of Sacred Music out of from Wyeth. So again, a lot of these coming from that Southern tradition.
Thank you, Beth.
Keeping with the theme of there still is some trash along the highway. So we are, I set aside Monday, October 10th. We meet at the Brew House in Ellison Bay and clean up our section of the highway. And there'll be a sign-up sheet in the lobby one of these soon days. That's Monday, October 10th, with a rain day the 13th.
On behalf of Third Avenue Playworks, my involvement with the environmental justice team here at Fellowship, Jacob Jansen, who's the new artistic director at Third Avenue Playworks, has put together an environmental roundtable on Tuesday, October 4th at 7 o'clock at the theater. I'll hang this on the flyer in the lobby. They have drawn together 9 different leaders of environmental organizations in Door County, as well as representation from the Sierra Club and Nature Conservancy. And we're going to talk about what kinds of inspiration and advocacy we can bring the community together to work on. So any questions, let me know. It's drawn its source from their new show, Birds of North America, which addresses environmental issues as well as intergenerational discussion. Thanks.
Thank you, Jerry. Let us light our candle and begin our service with words of Eric Hellerwig. Blessed is the fire that burns deep in the soul. It is the flame of the human spirit touched into being by the mystery of life. It is the fire of reason, the fire of compassion, the fire of community, the fire of justice, the fire of faith. It is the fire of love burning deep in the human heart, the divine glow in each of our lives. Please stand as you are able to say the unison affirmation and to sing the doxology. Yes, you heard me. We get to sing today. We gather together to seek knowledge and wisdom, to explore freely the vast reaches of mind and spirit, to celebrate within a caring community those truths, ancient and modern, which give meaning and direction to our lives. I think we would all clap. We have one in tears. And now to share our personal joys and concerns, an integral and sustaining part of our community. Together we share the happiness so that we may rejoice with each other, and the sorrow because together we may lessen your burden. Again, remember this is live, so please, if you're speaking for or about someone, make sure that you have their permission. Terry has the mic.
For the internet, I'm Ken Boyd. I want to report a little bit about what's going on in Florida, because we live right off of Sanibel. I mean, right off. And every report I get is worse than the one before. There is no, at Shell Point where we live, which is 2,800 people, there's no power, no water, no sewage. The first ground floors are pretty much gone with water damage. Cars were floating in the parking lots. And it is almost like you can't believe. Sanibel itself is gone, and it may take 4 years to get the causeway back. The Fort Myers Beach, you've seen pictures, if you've seen the videos of Fort Myers Beach. It's bad. The problem is that this isn't just a localized thing. It covers several counties, and there's a lot of people in those areas. So anything that we can do to help, we're ready to do. But our plan, frankly, is to stay here as long as we can, is necessary. There's no need to go down and put ourselves in needing another mouth to feed, that kind of thing. So we may be here longer than we expected. Oh, yeah, I talked to our court rep. Each building has a representative. And I talked to her this morning, and when I called her, I said, "Did I wake you up?" She said, "No, I'm sitting here crying." And she said, one of the biggest concerns is the mental health of people. We're talking about elderly people for the most part, well, for every part. And many were borderline, they're starting to deteriorate mentally. This is really pushing them further over the edge. And what to do? You can only live in a shelter so long. They're feeding people, but what happens when the food runs out? Because there's no supply, there's no power, gasoline and that kind of thing for generators, is whether they have generators, how do you resupply them? So it gets, and the water, the public utilities say that there's major water breaks, but they can't even find them because there's so much debris on top of things, they don't even know where to look. The one report from the power companies say that it could take 10 weeks to get power and water back together. So that gives you some idea of what, we're on the second floor, thank God, of our building. But if it doesn't get power, we could end up with mold and other kind of damage just because of being shut up in a hot, humid environment. So this thing is far worse than anything you could have imagined. Thank you.
Thanks for sharing, Ken.
Some of you know that for the last 5 years, Mary and I have been going down every 4 weeks to Chicago to help with her brother and to clean out his apartment. And John died a week ago, Thursday. We were in Canada. In fact, we didn't get home until last night. But fortunately, our two daughters individually were able to stop by and be with John shortly before he died. So his death was unexpected. In fact, it was horribly prolonged. So in one sense, it's a blessing.
In a few more joys, Dick Smythe is back. Our beloved member and friend has conjured up another story to share. This time a compelling story of a man who truly lived what he believed. Thank you, Dick, for sharing insights with us once again. And another joy, coffee and tea. One of these days, maybe we'll get back to those yummy treats. I'm not sure when, but at least for today, we have coffee and tea. Please join us in the gathering room for a bit of socializing, and then back here with a talk back with Dick. We'll take about 10 minutes to grab that cup of coffee or a cup of tea or a glass of water. Again, it will be Zoomed for our friends at home, but in person for us. So when the chimes ring, please come back. And now for our offering. To keep our fellowship alive and well, we need your time, your talents, and your money. Please be as generous as you are able. As we move into a moment of quiet, let us take the time to center ourselves so that we may hear fully what Dick has prepared for us.
Let's suppose for just a minute that all of us were entitled, each of us, to nominate someone for sainthood. Now, this individual had to have done her or his work this century, and you must be prepared to write a supportive statement to back up your nomination. Do you have any candidates that spring into mind right away? I do. I do have a candidate, and I will attempt to make my case this morning. My nominee would be Clarence Jordan. Now, his name may not be familiar to many of us, and he would be horrified at what I'm about to say. But his life almost defies belief. It's just absolutely unbelievable. My one hope this morning is that somehow I can do justice in a way that will be meaningful to most of us. Clarence Jordan was in one sense a contemporary of ours. He was born in 1912 and died all too soon in 1969. He was born in Georgia and lived there his entire life. If we were to say Clarence was a dedicated Christian, it would be true, but it would be a huge understatement. For Clarence, God was a very, very real presence. But having said that, he was certainly no stuffed shirt Christian. He had a wonderful sense of humor, and here's an example. As he put it in one of his talks, there's a difference between a sermon and a lesson. A sermon is something you sleep through. Then tell the preacher that you enjoyed it. But a lesson is something which is assigned and for which you are held responsible. You don't sleep through lessons. You only sleep through sermons. Thus, for Jordan, it was not the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew, but the lesson on the Mount. I only hope my talk this morning is not a sermon. So who was Jordan? Who was he? He was born, as I said, in 1912 in the West Georgia town of Talbottom. He was the seventh of 10 kids who survived infancy. He never moved away. He spent his entire life attempting to confront what W.E.B. Du Bois called the Negro problem. He lived his entire adult life on an interracial farm called Koinonia that he and his wife Florence established with one other couple in 1942. Koinonia is just 7 miles from Plains, and Plains, of course, as many of us remember, is home of Jimmy Carter. And just as a side note, I can't resist making this side commentary, Koinonia was the first deliberately racially integrated community. Mary grew up in the second deliberately integrated racial community in Lombard, Illinois. Now, this man had an unbelievable relationship with his mother, who was the major religious influence in his life. And while he was in college, she wrote him a letter saying this, quote, I am quite sure that God placed his seal upon you and set you apart to do his bidding even before you came into this world. She also repeated on numerous occasions, quote, it is perfectly natural for me to love you more than I love my other children. And how's that for a burden to bear? As a young man, Jordan was marked with a precocious conscience and an abiding sense of guilt, coupled with remarkable fearlessness, and he never lost any of those qualities. While he was in college, he considered becoming a lawyer so he might work for justice for all people. And then he thought, well, maybe a study of agriculture might be a way to help the poor lift the burdens off their back. But he was a male student at the University of Georgia, and in 1929, all males were required to take ROTC. So he did. And at the end of his college career, he was within weeks of receiving his commission as a second lieutenant. But he asked to see his commanding officer, and he sat down with this officer, and he said that he had just completed memorizing the Sermon on the Mount. Now that's 3 chapters in Matthew. That's Matthew 5, 6, and 7. And he could no longer avoid the conflict that those teachings presented with his military training. He told the colonel, quote, you and Jesus are teaching me opposite things. I have to relinquish one or the other. So the colonel reminded him of the advantages of an army commission and asked Clarence if he was sure he'd thought through the ramifications of the decision. And when the discussion ended, the colonel, who was a veteran of World War I, sat perfectly still for 5 minutes, didn't say a word. And then he got up, put his hand on Jordan's shoulder and said, God bless you, boy. And then he added this remarkable comment. He said, I hope someday you can make my job impossible. Thought that was just a remarkable statement. So shortly after Jordan completed his undergraduate work, he heard what he described as an audible voice saying, my child, I want you to preach for me. And Jordan replied, yes, Lord, whatever you say, just promise me that you will go with me. So Jordan applied and was accepted at Southern Baptist Seminary in Louisville, Kentucky, where he eventually earned a PhD in New Testament Greek. Now you may wonder, why would a farm boy, a poor farm boy from rural Georgia, study Greek? As he put it, I had no desire to impress anybody with a little bit of learning, but I knew I would be coming in contact with a lot of people, both clergy and laity, who would claim to be followers of Jesus Christ. And I wanted to know what Jesus actually said. So during this time as an undergraduate, he became a supply preacher, meaning that he spoke in churches and Baptist colleges and universities, that he was in great demand. He was a wonderful speaker. But that wasn't good enough. He felt called to live a life that demonstrated his deep faith. He was convinced that meaningful faith demanded a life lived in concert with that faith. In other words, he determined to live a life with complete integrity. And in honoring this commitment, his life will reflect a radical pilgrimage in scorn of all consequences. And there will be many severe consequences in his life. And I will share a few of those. Now, please remember, We're talking about 1940s, 50s, and 60s in the Deep South, right in the heart of Ku Klux Klan country. I'm not sure any of us, without personal experience, can fully comprehend the Southern social ethos which absolutely overrode any religious faith and other issue. And I have to add, we see a similar phenomenon today, where political party allegiance in some cases overrides every other political consideration. So here's Jordan, one of his sermons. Today, when the church is being attacked and challenged on every hand as a viable institution, when the church is in doubt and confused about its own identity and mission, it must touch base. It must make contact with the rock from which it is hewn. When the church is facing such tremendous problems, it cannot afford to go off half-cocked. And today, we are facing problems of militarism and violence. We are facing problems of poverty. And we are facing an even more grievous sickness in our culture, that of extreme wealth. All these things are greatly affecting us today, and we are anxious to get out and start doing something about it. Do something, anything, quick. I don't want the church to go off half-cocked, for I know how frustrating it can be for us to get out to do the work of God, as he put it, without the presence of God and without the power of God. Jesus said something about seeds falling on rocky ground where they quickly spring up. Sometimes I hear ministers haranguing their congregations, do something, get busy, do something. It's about like trying to automate a bunch of corpses. We aren't ready to do anything meaningful. We're dead. We've got to have the power of the Spirit from on high that will make us living beings. And then I think we can get on with the Father's business. That's pretty blunt talk, but it's very typical of Jordan. Here's Jordan in another sermon. Beyond all doubt, man's most vexing problem, from prehistoric times to the present, has been learning how to respond to those who oppose him. Or I can relate to that. Finally, here is Jordan with the issue that became the primary focus of his adult life. He put it this way: the racial conflict is by far the most widespread, most damaging to life, property, and soul, the most insolvable of all conflicts that beset mankind. The racial conflict is global and seemingly eternal. In 1942, Jordan and his wife Florence, together with one other couple who had served as missionaries in Africa, bought a rundown, deeply gullied farm near Amicus, Georgia. Just 7 miles northeast of Plains, once again. Not only was the soil deeply gullied, but the few buildings, including the house, were on the verge of total collapse. But after a few preliminary repairs, his wife and kids moved into the house that his wife described as barely suitable for camping. Jordan named the farm Koinonia, which is from the book of Acts. It's Greek and it means fellowship or community or sharing. And as he described in Acts, the early Christians lived in a cooperative society with all possessions and all money shared in common. Now that was radical enough for those poor people in Georgia. But the farm was also a demonstration of racial equality for the express purpose of living out the teachings of Jesus. In other words, Koinonia was for Jordan a demonstration plot for the kingdom of God. Now here's a reflection from Jimmy Carter. The Koinonia people welcomed their neighbors and built true friendships with them. And most of those neighbors were black tenant farmers. If these Christians at Koinonia needed help planting or harvesting a crop, they paid the same wages to both black and white, a practice not common in those days. At mealtime, everyone sat down at the same table. An act forbidden is the language Carter used in the segregated South. Those Christians were an irritant to the southern white status quo of Sumter County. If you lived as close to Koinonia as I did, it was impossible not to hear the movements of the, quote, nigger-loving communists, unquote, who lived there. Almost every local merchant participated in the boycott of the farm. The idea being to squeeze out the Koinonia people, get them out of the county, thus eliminating an unwanted thorn from the social fabric of Southern racism. That's Jimmy Carter. There are two other familiar voices. First, Martin Luther King. He called Clarence Jordan my friend, my mentor, and my inspiration. And in fact, some think, and this would be easy for me to believe, I can't prove it, it's true, but this would be easy for me to believe, that his famous I Have a Dream speech that he gave in Washington, D.C. in 1963, that King may well have been thinking of Jordan and Koinonia when he said, I have a dream. I have a dream that one day the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. When Martin Luther King Jr. thought of Clarence Jordan, he said, here was the son of the Old South, a white Baptist minister, doing just what we were just talking about doing. I went to Koinonia later to see for myself. And this is what he said. I couldn't wait to leave because I was sure the Klan would show up and kill both of us. Andrew Young echoed King's statement. When we first heard about Clarence Jordan and Koinonia, we considered it far too radical, too dangerous. Young went on to say that some of us were trying to give people the right to ride on a bus or shop in the local stores. But here was Clarence, right smack dab in the middle of Ku Klux Klan country, going for the whole loaf. Clarence put the rest of us to shame until we did something about it. Now, like King, Jordan paid a high price. He paid an incredibly high price. He endured the scorn of neighbors, visits from the Klan, including a 90-car caravan, interrogations from the FBI, shooting and beating of members of Koinonia, orchard trees chopped down, roadside markets blown up. Now here's one of many examples that give you some idea of what their life was like. And I will let Jordan tell this story in his words. The phone rang about 1:30 a.m. in the morning. We're used to all kinds of crank phone calls. Usually they come late at night and begin by somebody cussing us out in a drunken tone. And you generally let them talk kind of to discharge their static electricity or whatever it is that's motivating them. But this voice was very deliberate. He said, "Who's speaking?" I said, "Clarence Jordan." He said, "Mr. Jordan, I just wanted to let you know that within about 17 minutes, there's going to be a green pickup truck pulled out of that dirt road just below the bridge, and it's going to be loaded with dynamite. Now, we haven't blown up your place with dynamite yet. Now, we're going to blow it off the face of the map." I just wanted to call you to let you know so you would have time to get the people out of the buildings. I said, but brother, anyone who calls me at 1:30 in the morning to warn me to get those people out of the buildings, I owe him a debt of gratitude. And this is just classic Jordan. I owe him a debt of gratitude. And I would like to know to whom I am grateful. He said, I told you that isn't important. And now you've got 16 minutes. Bang, down went the phone. The line was dead. I'm standing there at 1:30 in the morning, a dead telephone in my hand with 16 minutes to go. What are we going to do? About that time, my boy called out. He said, who was it, Daddy? I said he wouldn't tell me. What did he want? He wants to blow the place up. His son replied, oh. I went back to the bedroom, and my wife said, what's all that about? Some guy said he's going to blow this place up in 16 minutes. His wife replied, really? And rolled over in bed. So I crawled back in bed. I must confess the thoughts in my head were not conducive to sound slumber. I watched that clock tick off the minutes. Ticked off 16 minutes. The pickup came, slowed down, and I was sure he was coming in. But he didn't. How many of us would go back to bed after receiving such a threat? How many of us have a spouse and a child who would also ignore such a threat? Now, I've got to relate one more conversation because this is absolutely priceless. I just love this conversation. And once again, I'm going to use Jordan's words. So these are direct quotes. A reporter came to Kunani to interview Jordan. First question, who finances this project? Well, all along, folks who helped us said that the Lord had sent them. So I said to this newspaper reporter, the Lord does. Yeah, I know, he said, but who supports it? I said, the Lord. Yeah, I know, but who, you know what I'm talking about. Who's back of it? I said, the Lord. But he said, I mean hell. Don't you know what I mean? I said, yeah, friend, I know what you mean, but you don't know what I mean. What can you say? There's one more aspect of his life that I want to briefly comment on. In many respects, Jordan was a classic prophet. I'm relying now on the wisdom of several authors whom I deeply respect. Prophets write and proclaim the words from God, and by so doing, they seek to reshape the religious word of the day. Now, where did they get such courage? Where did they get such strength? These authors believe that they themselves must have been shattered by one or more personal experiences. This was certainly true for Clarence Jordan. For years, he'd been a loyal member of the Rehoboth Baptist Church. But koinonia was too much for the good church people. And they threw him out, rejecting him and his vision. He never joined another church, and he died still waiting to achieve within the church that which he had devoted his entire life, reconciliation. A second shattering experience was living at Koinonia, a statement of his values that would in time erupt in violence and bring untold suffering and heartache to Jordan personally and to others at Koinonia. Jordan's farm was gradually reduced to just 2 couples, and Jordan found himself depressed and essentially immobilized. He had to figure out some new way of experiencing his faith and living his faith. And his competency in Greek became the foundation for his cotton patch translations of the New Testament. These make wonderful reading. He translated much of the New Testament in the 1960s, and he was still working on this effort the day he died in 1969. And in these texts, Jordan translated the Bible into the idiom of the South and in the context of racial tensions. As one example, the letter to the Romans was now addressed to the Christians in Washington, D.C. Ephesians to the Christians in Birmingham, or as some put it, Birmingham. As just one very brief example of his work, here's a New Revised Standard Version translation of Matthew 2:13, which is where the angel exhorts Joseph to escape the wrath of King Herod after the birth of Jesus. Quote, "An angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, 'Get up, take the child and his mother and flee to Egypt.'" Here's the cotton patch version. "Get moving. Take your wife and baby and highball it to Mexico." Though Jordan tragically died early at age 57, his memory and legacy did not. His life was a rebuke to Christian churches that had failed to see, in his words, the humanity of God. Fortunately, his abiding sensitivity to the plight of the poor and the plight of the dispossessed live on, with the rebirth of Koinonia as Habitat for Humanity. His story can be understood as something like a scream in a dark night while all of us are asleep. The voice that God has lent to the silent agony of the plundered poor. The legend of Clarence Jordan lives on. He truly lived his life in the scorn of the consequences. And when he died, there was a celebration of that life at Koinonia, a celebration, but no mourning. He was buried as he wished, attired in his working clothes, in a cheap wooden casket, interred in an unmarked grave at Koinonia. The dedication, integrity, and courage of Clarence Jordan, along with the unwavering support of his family, almost defy belief. I wish I could have known him. He is my nominee for sainthood.
Thank you, Dick. You never disappoint us. Remember to join us for coffee or tea in the gathering room and then back here in about 10 minutes. So right around 11 o'clock, we'll ring the chimes to come back in, and we'll meet over here to visit with Dick and probably hear more stories about Clarence Jordan. We close our service and extinguish our candle with words from Samuel Trumbore. Go forth in simplicity. Find and walk the path that leads to compassion and wisdom, that leads to happiness, peace, and ease. Welcome the stranger and open your heart to a world in need of healing. Be courageous before the forces of hate. Hold and embody a vision of the common good that serves the needs of all people.
Thank you for joining us this morning. I hope you have a great rest of your day and a joyful week ahead.